So COVID-19 pandemic, what it has meant to us in the church, and more so the many challenges that were lied ahead for us, and how it has changed the landscape of the church and how we worship. COVID has had an effect on many of our people, more so on the life of the church, but also a major effect on how the church had to worship. And so we had to look at new ways, innovative ways of worshiping together. And as we are called theologically to come together in public worship, as the scriptures reminds us of that as well. When Jesus, although Jesus' ministry was on the road, whichever town he went to, he was able to go into the house of God to worship and to teach the people. And so we had to look at new ways. This is what COVID has done, has forced our hand as the church, and we were challenged to look at innovative ways of still holding our people together spiritually. And so we had to resort to ways of virtual services, and which was very difficult at the beginning, as people are commonly known for being together in the same room. But here in the virtual space, you had to do prayers completely unknown with your families, where you had to virtually share the space with those who you usually come together with to do that. And so we had many ways of doing services. One of the ways, a virtual space, was that we used the WhatsApp group platform as in to provide services to our parishioners. We would do live stream via Facebook, posting our services on YouTube as well. But we were also challenged to look at ways of how we come and celebrate this wonderful sacrament which we call Holy Communion, how we had to do that in innovative ways, and the whole theological aspect around virtual consecration of the bread and the wine. So here at the parish of St. Margaret's, we were very innovative as in how we wanted to share Holy Communion with our community. And one of those things were through the Eucharist car park services. And so what would happen is that the parishioners would listen to the service on a virtual platform, mostly via WhatsApp, and then they would hop into their cars and drive down to the church, and they would come into the car park, as you know, like you go to a food outlet, like a McDonald's or KFC, those, and they have their drive-throughs, and so you go from window to window. And so they would drive up, and they would then stop by the priest first, who would then give them consecrated bread and wine, which was put into tubs, and obviously with regards to adhering to the protocols of COVID-19 in sanitizing our hands, and also in how we prepared the bread and the wine, and when we consecrated that, and so adhering to all of those protocols as well. And so you would stop there first, and you would then consume it in the presence of the priest. You would receive a blessing, and as you drive out, you would stop and you would throw your containers into a water bowl with sanitizer in there as well, and then you would be off on your way. Some people also had the opportunity to drop off their pledge forms, um, their offertories as well, and so through monetary. And so it was wonderful for us to be innovative and to look at new ways of still holding the community together spiritually. And so it has been a challenge. One of the things I think is that, that what this has created, or what could possibly create it, is what we call Christian consumerism, where you were able to shop online, and so you don't have to virtually join your specific parish's worship service, but you, by a click of a button, you could join any particular parish service anywhere in the world. And so, that has been, would be one of the challenges as well, from a virtual aspect and worshiping together. And so I think that, especially as far as our worship is concerned, we are going to struggle to get people back to church, and that is going to be a big challenge for many of us. And so how people have become accustomed to worshiping in their own space, and how do you get people back into the church. And so, when the restrictions was lifted with people to finally come back to church, it has been a challenge. People haven't been flocking back to church. But so we've been holding in-person services, and then obviously also we would continue with virtual services as well. And so that's where we find ourselves in the way we have to worship and be creative and innovative in the life of the church at this present moment. And so, as I would say, as a church, you have to move with the times and what we have to do at this very present moment. One of the other things in the life of the church was also that people were losing their jobs. Many of our parishes, especially in our diocese, also Dana Bay, are situated in a lot of areas where unemployment are high, and poverty is high, and crime is high. And so there was this need of people being fed, especially during the hard lockdown, people being fed, people being assisted in whichever way it was possible. And so what we did here at our specific parish was that we went on this drive, and with regards to food parcels and the soup kitchen, which is an existing thing in our parish at the moment. We would feed those who are hungry at least once a week, where we would have out in the front of a day hospital down here in Paro, where anybody could come and they would be fed through this particular service. With regards to how difficult it was, many people have lost their jobs, and as a parish of St. Margaret's, we financially we were stable. People were still giving very generously during the time of lockdown, and we supported other parishes as well, like the parish of St. Timothy's in Frackerton, and St. Andrew's Eureka Estate. We helped them with food parcels, and so it's been challenging for many people during this time, and because people have lost their jobs and there wasn't enough food to put on the table. And so we engaged in this outreach program, but it was also an initiative that spread beyond St. Margaret's. It was in the life of the church on a whole, and so we continue to hold people um, in prayer, but also to assist people. In our very own parish, we also created what we call the CF19 fund, which was due to this COVID, and so people could contribute to this particular fund, and so we would use that to make up food parcels, to purchase food parcels, or data that was needed for those who wanted to follow our services virtually, to our young people as well in terms of schooling and that, online schooling and that. And so that fund was there to provide and help people as well. And as we reminded in the Gospels that, Jesus, fed the 5,000 with the bread and the fish. And so as a church, we are called to see to the needs of others, to see to the needs of our communities, and especially during this very, very difficult time. And so we embrace our people, we hold our people in our hearts, and we continue to do as much as we can as the church and to help people, whether it may be through outreach programs, but it's what we are called. And one of our mission statements as a parish, a church without walls, and so we reach out into our communities to help those in need. One of the other things we did as well was for our elderly, or what we like to call them in our parish, the legends. And so we had our core team who looked after the needs of our elderly, our legends. So they were also provided with food parcels and a little pavement visit and checking in with them and holding them during this time, because it has affected many of them emotionally and psychologically, and especially when they are used to being together and coming together regularly, at least twice or twice a month, just to fellowship together. And so that form of support and that need that was given to our legends, our elderly people. When we look at worship in the life of the church, and especially more so our services, you would generally, when there would be funerals or weddings, you would have the church that would be packed. And so the COVID-19 pandemic has had a major effect on those particular services, those celebrations, those moments of mourning and grieving. With regards to funeral services, it has been really challenging, and as a priest, it's been difficult when people have lost loved ones, and especially to the pandemic, and if they have died from COVID. And so it has been a difficult one to minister to the family during that grieving process. I think one of the hardest things was, when you had to say to families that you are only allowed a certain amount of people. And my heart breaks, because where do you begin to say to people, who do you put on the list, who do you leave off the list, and how that affects the family, as in the difficult decision that they have to make with regards to who comes to the funeral, who doesn't come to the funeral. And so it's enough that they're grieving, and so now this added burden is to them. So one of the things that we had to do in terms of that was that they had to, from a logistic aspect, that they had to provide a list to the church, and we would print that list. And as people would arrive on the day of that particular service, people had to go through the whole regulations, the protocols with regards to sanitization, taking temperatures. All the details were already on a spreadsheet, and they had to social distance within the church, and that was also hard to see families not able to comfort each other as they bid farewell to a loved one, and the effects that it had on that you had to tell people that they had to social distance, and we understood, with regards to where we find ourselves, but it takes away from that grieving process for those who have lost loved ones. And so it's really been difficult as a priest to minister to our people in that heartache during this pandemic, and with all the added laws and rules and things that were put in place. I think one of the other things with regards to weddings also, once again, they also had to adhere to the same protocols in terms of inviting people to the service as well, keeping to wearing masks and social distancing and sanitizing of hands, and lists that had to be made out as well. The bride coming down the aisle with the face mask on, and the groom standing there with his face mask on. And I'm sure that many people have not imagined or pictured the wedding day being like this, and so that has also taken a toll on the bride and the groom as well. How they would have imagined the special day to be. And so, it has been difficult. It has been challenging for our people who mourn at funeral services, for our people who celebrate at wedding services as well, and any other form of service as well, which we still had to adhere to all the social distancing. We were not allowed to make physical contact with people by hugging and shaking hands and taking away all of that. But we understand the nature of this pandemic, and that we have to try and keep our people safe at all cost. So it's been very difficult in terms of logistics and how you would have had to put everything in place, making sure everything is in place, sanitizing the space before and after the service as well. Before we could open the doors of our churches, we had to do a deep clean as well. All the lists that we had to do, we had to look at innovative ways of how people had to indicate which service they come into. I just take example for our traditional Christmas services, which was a challenge and a bit of debate amongst us. How do you allow people to come to church, and just because the numbers that restricted you from having people, and traditionally we would have a packed church. And so you had to work on a limited amount of numbers, and so who got those seats, who were able to come to those particular services, pushing in more services as well. And so it's been a very trying time for us in the church. I think one of the major effects that it has on you as a cleric is that you see the pain and suffering of the people, and we are called to serve God's people. We are called to minister. We are called to serve and make the sacraments available to all our people. Um, Even interesting so with our baptism services, where tradition as a priest, you would, when the baby is baptized, that you would actually hold the baby and to pour the water of the baby's head, and you would sign him or her with the sign of the cross with the holy oil, and all of that had to change. That you had to um, the parents had to hold the baby, the water's poured onto the baby's head. You had to use a earbud or a cotton bud and make the sign of the cross with the holy oil on the baby's head, and the traditional kiss on the baby's cheek, which you could not do as well. And so it has been difficult, and we have been pushed to move away from customs and traditions at this present moment. As a cleric, takes this pandemic has taken a major toll on one's spiritual life, on one's emotional um, and mental um, well-being. Um, but we had to find ways of pushing through that, through meditations, through um, speaking to other colleagues, speaking to what we call your spiritual director, spiritual advisor, someone that would keep us grounded, someone who would encourage you, someone who would hold you there as you minister and pastor to all the people. And so it's been very, very difficult. As the church, I don't see how we are going to go back to normal anytime soon. But I think the big question is, what does it mean to be a church in a new way? That is the challenge for us. How do we hold on to the gospel? How do we continue to live out the gospel in this very, very difficult